Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another episode here on the SMP. This is part 3 of the World Tour series and probably the very last episode of the SMP. So, I guess we should make it special somehow, but I don't really know how. We're just going to be touring the rural area, talk about a bunch of trees, talk about some of the buildings, the stuff I made in the rural area. If you didn't watch the rest of the World Tour series, all we did really was talk about the town in depth in the last episode, and in the episode before that we talked about the entire server and just kind of did a little bit of a highlight world tour with Expelfar. Talked a little bit with him about different stuff he's made, about stuff I made, about stuff other people on the server have made. It was fun. But in this episode we're focusing on that rural area over there, and it should be pretty interesting. I guess we should probably just go ahead and go over there. Well, I don't think we're going to do it in a really chronological order, but the things that are closest to the town happen to be the oldest stuff. So we're kind of in the oldest section. It's kind of chronological. I want to start with this bridge, though. We mentioned it in the last episode, but we didn't really talk about it much. It is pretty much just a bridge. I did plan this out in creative mode first, just to make sure I had like the dimensions and like the shape of it right, but it's not very fancy. I went through kind of a couple ideas in my head, but I ended up just making a flat kind of bridge. There was like a idea that I had that it could be like a covered bridge thing, or have like a sign that says welcome to town name, different stuff like that, but I ended up just making a flat bridge. But this area over here is the first area that we made in the rural area, in between this road, this fence post, and the water, and it's aged pretty well. I mostly did stuff in the rural area by hand, so a lot of the stuff that's old, it looks very different than the stuff that's new if you paid close enough attention. But if you're not really focusing on certain aspects of this too much, you can just walk by it and not really notice. But it is pretty nice. There's a few different things that I did here that are pretty unique. But at the time, I didn't really have a good idea of what I was doing just yet. I had a couple ideas of what I wanted the rural area to be, and they weren't all the same idea. They were kind of just different scatterings of ideas, and I ended up, as time went on, deciding that I wanted to kind of do a more realistic impression of something than I originally thought I was doing over here. So if you look over here, we have pretty much just one tree type. It's just oak trees, right? And there is one cedar tree in this little guy. But other than that, there's nothing really going on here. There's, I mean, a couple of rocks and flowers and stuff, but it's not very diverse or realistic. But as you like move through the rest of the build, you start to see other kinds of trees, and you see like the pine trees over here that are, you know, crazy. There's a lot of different things going on in this area. But over in that corner, there's just one type of tree, and that wasn't that's just because I didn't plan things out very well mostly, but I decided to keep it that way and kind of just transition into areas that have a little bit more diversity. And I think that ended up working out pretty well. But one thing that really helped making this whole area was ecoregions from the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States. They like list ecoregions in different ways, and you can like Google specific ecoregions. So if you're trying to make a thing that's like specific to a certain area and realistic and naturey, I highly recommend looking that stuff up. I won't talk too much about it now because I talked a little bit about it before, and I probably won't talk too much about these trees either because I talked about those a little bit before as well. But I guess that brings us on to the first house over here. There's actually a little bit of a story between all these cabins, and well, like not really between them, but each of them kind of tell their own little story. This one is supposed to be a little bit of like a crop farmer kind of cabin, so you have a crop farm beside of it, of course, and you have a tractor over there, and just a couple different little design choices. Even inside, you have a little bit of a storage area down here with a hay bale in it and that kind of thing. But there's really not much really to dissect. It's been a really long time since I built these, so there's certain things that I kind of forgot about them. But if I remember right, they were all built with like a similar design mentality. So I started with a, I think 7 by 11 base outline kind of thing, and basically built a cabin off of that. And the 3 different cabins all kind of share that same similar outline, but have slightly different aspects kind of added on. So this one has a little bit of like a wooden plank section added on, built on to the side of it, which ends up being the loft inside here, this area right here. And there's other similar things with the other cabins, but we'll get to those later, so I'm not running around the world area all episode. But over here we have this tractor, which I designed off of a specific real life tractor that I know, and that I don't know. There's just probably somebody that knows what I'm talking about, but if you don't know, you're not gonna know. Sorry about that. Anyways, we got a fishing dock over here, which I just added mostly because everybody was fishing on the server at the time, and I figured I should have a fishing dock. I ended up not using it pretty much at all because all the fishing was happening on the other side of the server, and not over here. So I ended up just going over there anyway. But crop farm, there's nothing really special here. I did have these jack-o'-lanterns here mostly because of lighting. I actually didn't really need to make scarecrows or anything like that. I just ended up wanting it to be lit up a little bit better. Most of the water is hidden behind or under the ground, but some of it is under hay bales, like that right there. But other than that, we also have fences and trees and stuff. We already talked a little bit about trees, and I probably won't mention these ones again too much, but this is over here, the most of the fence, and I didn't really decorate it or think about it too much while I was doing it. I just kind of placed a bunch of oak fences because that's what I had, and then added some slabs and stuff to make it look a little bit better on the slopes, and that was pretty much it. I think it looks pretty nice. We have a couple little details, like it looks like it's fallen in certain areas or something like that. But nothing else really to talk about in this area. We have a sign over here, I guess. This was added a lot later than this cabin, and it kind of has the directions to different aspects of the build that you might need directions to, like the town, spawn, stable, and I also added this little sign here because I felt like it kind of told a nice story of like this beekeeper selling his honey and making a little sign hand drawn over there. But yeah, that kind of brings us on to this cabin right here. This is the beekeeper area, so you'll see in a lot of the details over here. We have a lot of flowers, we have bees and beehives and stuff like that in the back. The cabin itself wasn't actually designed originally to be a beekeeper's cabin, but it ended up being the beekeeper's cabin anyway, so there's not really much on the interior that would hint at that other than a couple flowers in there. But most of it is outside. You have a lot of flowers outside pretty much. That's the extent of what makes the beekeeper's area. We have a couple of details on the interior, but again, nothing really to talk about that really says beekeeper. We have this little passage and access to the industrial area down here. We have a couple other areas that you can like come and leave that industrial area from, but I figured I should probably mention this. Most of these designs and builds and farms and stuff weren't originally designed by me, but some of them were. at least kind of cobbled together from parts other people made by me. I did hook up everything to this bulk storage system and different things like that, but the industrial area isn't something I really care to do much of an in-depth tour about. And it's, it's just more of a functional thing than a real, you know, design choices and creative decision making and that different things like that. You can see already that the designs of the trees have changed quite a bit in here. So like this one feels really narrow on this side, but really wide on this other side. We're starting to kind of refine the process a little bit between trees in that corner over there and trees over here. But we're also adding in new types of trees, like this pine tree. Now, I've gone on many rants about pine trees since the beginning of the rural area and making a bunch of pine trees, and that's for a good reason. Pine trees are weird, really weird. They don't have any sort of consistency to them. I actually have seen on the Wikipedia page that it says that basically in a bit more of a professional way, but the same sentiment is expressed in that they really don't follow a good pattern of growth. They just do random things most of the time. But we also have some other trees like this, which is a hickory tree. We did go into depth about these in the video where I talked about how I make trees. So we've already gone in depth about these as well. But for a brief summary, these are meant to just kind of be a little bit more narrow to fill in some of the gaps. They, I think, provide a nice shape, a nice contrast between the different types of trees, as well as a little bit of a transition. And I just kind of like the shape of them. They're really nice. Now, I was also doing these by freehand, so there's a bit of a difference between them. And you can kind of see as time went on, I tried different things and ended up refining the process quite a bit by the time I got to the last trees. Now, there's also something that I think I just spotted in this area. There's wolves that naturally seem to spawn in this area sometimes, and I don't know how or why. I don't know the rules of how wolves spawn, but apparently they spawn here now. They weren't for a while, and they didn't before. There's nothing else that seems to spawn in here either. I don't know really what's going on there, but I've noticed a couple of these guys running around in the last couple of days, which is kind of interesting. Anyway, this section over here is meant to be the kind of stable section where I keep all my horses, but also a little bit of a pine tree forest that we have going on over here. And you can definitely tell that there's a different type of tree going on here, and I think you can tell that they're pine trees. I don't know that for sure though, because pine trees are weird, and they're weird. Okay. Anyway, like I said, it's stable, so you got some interesting stuff in here that makes it look, I think, a lot like a stable. Again, I did a sort of weird pattern with the roofs on most of the stables where there's kind of decoration up here that probably isn't too structural, but I think looks cool. But we have some horses in here. These are some horses I got that were pretty fast, so these are like my really fast ones that I used to breed up my mule that I use right now. But here are some of my older ones. This is, I think, the first horse I had and the first donkey, and not the first mule I had, but one of the first, and it's pretty slow compared to the one I have now. So that's kind of the different horses that are in here. There's not too much to talk about them other than that, though. We have some details in there that make it look a little bit more like a stable than it did before. We have storage for our saddles, stuff like that, but really, I just made a bunch of trees and stuff, and I did it in a pretty short amount of time. Probably too short of amount of time, if we're being realistic. I did it all in like a day or two. It was crazy. We also have a little bit of terraforming going on down here. Now the whole island actually is terraformed from its original shape quite a bit, but this area right here has a little nice cliff that is unique, so I thought I'd mention it. But as we keep going in here, I didn't make too many pine trees over course of a long course of time. So like there's a couple more pine trees that I eventually made, like this one I threw in later, and this one that I made quite a bit later. But I even though I made a couple of them after making the bulk of them all at once, I didn't really have too much time to refine the process too much, so they changed quite a bit by the time I got over here. Not too much though, and they kind of varied enough in look that they kind of don't all fit in. So I'm not like completely happy with this pine tree, for example, even though I am like happy enough to leave it, but it's not quite the same as some of the other ones. But they all kind of are intended to vary anyway. So we have kind of a couple different types, like this one, which is a little bit more broad and flat. It has these kind of flat arching branches with a kind of flat leaf shape. There's these ones which are a little bit more pointy, so all the branches kind of point up, and they have a bit more of like a cone leaf shape on the top. There's kind of in between ones like this one, which have like branches that point upwards more, but not quite the same as those up there. And they have kind of like a more, I don't even know what you would call this. It's kind of in between a cone and a flat shape. So like this, no, not that one. One of them somewhere is pretty flat, but this one really isn't. It's a lot more pointy than some of them. But that's kind of the intended. That one's pretty flat. But that's kind of the intended idea behind a lot of the pine trees, is to kind of have a couple of different variations so that they seem a little bit more sporadic, like real life pine trees. That brings us on to yet another kind of tree that I haven't mentioned yet, and well, this one's a little bit more simple than a pine tree. This is an American sycamore tree, and I think it definitely looks the part. American sycamore trees are very identifiable because they have a gray bark that kind of falls off and exposes white wood underneath, and well, the pale oak was added to the game, so it was kind of just perfect. You know, I added this to the build after that, and it's really nice. I like it quite a bit. We have a couple different sizes and different examples in different places over here. Now, in real life, I think the branches kind of don't have too much of a predictable pattern, but for the build here, I've kind of just settled with making pretty simple shaped branches that just kind of go up in an arch like that. And I think it worked out pretty well, at least for the purposes of this. I also did something pretty fancy with the leaves with a little bit of shading. You have azalea leaves on the top and birch leaves underneath, which kind of provide a little bit of shading, but not too much to where it was hard to do. It was just kind of like a little bit of both, and it kind of worked out pretty well. I think did that on all of them pretty much, with a couple of like exceptions to vary up the texture a little bit, so you have a little bit of birch leaf right there, for example. But we have a couple different sycamore trees over here, but I think there's not too much to talk about other than that. I think they look nice. So I guess we'll move on to the last cabin over here. This cabin over here is the last in the rural area that's like an actual cabin. We have a couple more structures and stuff, but this is the last cabin we have to talk about. And this is pretty nice. This whole area was meant to kind of be a little bit like a pasture, and so it's a little bit more open. Have cows grazing around here and everything like that. We even have a little shelter for the cows, which it's pretty much just a couple walls and a roof. I didn't really put too much time or thought into that. I freehanded this structure. Actually, it's one of the only structures on the server that I freehanded. There's a couple other things that I did freehand, like the trees and stuff, but they're not really structures, you know. They're more just like decorative elements, I guess. But we have a different type of tree that I don't think I've mentioned much in this area here. We have the cedar tree, which is a specific type of tree for sure. I think I ended up making something that looks mostly like a cedar tree. You have kind of the texture of the spruce leaves, which kind of make it look a little bit more needled, and you have the warmth of the color from the azalea leaves, which I think give it the right kind of style, I guess, the right kind of shade of color. And you have, I think, a shape that looks quite a bit like a cedar tree does in real life. You also have a couple different variations of this, like there's some that are missing their pointy tops, which is intentional. It's not just me missing a couple blocks at the end of the build or anything like that. Sometimes cedar trees kind of, from getting struck by lightning or something, I don't know, lose a little bit of their top and end up kind of looking flat. So I threw that in as a little detail. But there's not too much more to talk about in this area. I guess we can look at the cabin a little bit more. This one was built again on that 7 and by 11 footprint, and this one I did something a little different on. I cut it in half, so the original cabin would have been half the size, and then the other half is built on and has that kind of plank texture on the outside that you see in the other areas whenever something is built onto a cabin. And I think that looks pretty good. You don't really notice it from afar. You don't really think about it too much. But if you pay closer attention, you kind of realize that there's a little bit more of a story going on there, which I really like. That brings us on to this forest over here, which has just more trees, pretty much. A bunch of oak trees. This is where I kind of started really refining some of the oak trees process. So at this point, you start to see a lot of the shapes that you would normally see. You start to see a couple weird things still left, but most of it is pretty much normal compared to what you would see in the last batch of oak trees I made, like this one over here. So nothing really to talk about here, but you do have some pretty nice oak trees. You also have the bridge to the spawn island. Now, I won't really be talking about the spawn island much because it's not in the rural area, but I do like the spawn area quite a bit. I keep calling it island. It's not an island, really. But anyway, here's a bridge. It's pretty nice. I like this quite a bit. It's modeled after the other rural area bridge. I built this quite a bit later, and I did freehand this one. It had to be in a diagonal, which I figured would give it quite a different character compared to the other one, and it turns out I was kind of right. So it looks quite a bit different, but it still kind of feels almost the same. So that's kind of what I was going for, and I think I achieved that. I guess that brings us on to the next area in the rural section. But since we're talking about all these trees, I figure it might be time to go ahead and, before we look at the farmhouse, kind of talk about this big tree and some of the other trees that I made in my creative mode testing world. Well, here it is. Now, I don't think I've mentioned or even I've shown you. I haven't shown you this world before. This is my creative mode testing world. You can see that I've been planning out some of the things from the town over there. We got more town stuff over here, and we got a lot of trees that are just floating over the ocean over here. This is because this is pretty much the correct biome tint. The correct biome tint is actually on this island over here, and I just moved them over this way so that they were out of the way and I could build more trees. But you have pretty much the correct biome tint over here. Now you can see there's quite a few different versions of the big tree that I ended up making in the rural area, and they're all pretty different in different ways, but none of them are the final product. None of them are the tree that made it onto the server because I free-handed that tree. I just practiced it a couple times here in creative mode before I ended up making the final one on the server. But we got a couple different things like cedar trees that I was trying to plan out for the first time. pine trees, which don't really look like pine trees. We got hickory trees and different stuff like that that I was trying to plan out. And there's certain trees like this sycamore tree, which I think look pretty much close to the final product, but there's other ones that definitely don't look the part. Like this one, it's very flat compared to the final tree that we ended up adding to the server. Very much a different shape. We have a lot more trunk than we do on the actual server and different things like that. And I think it's kind of a neat thing to see all of these different attempts at trees. But the whole process behind these big trees was I first made a big pillar up the center of the tree at about the height I wanted it to be. I built the kind of shape of the branches first, and then I added a little bit more detail to the branches so that they were made of stairs and slabs and stuff, and then added fences and leaves. And then once all the leaves were in place, I added a little bit of texturing, and you can kind of see there's like azalea over here, there's spruce over here, and a kind of a transition in between, so it looks like there's a little bit of lighting going on, which I really enjoy the look of. Now, there's not too much to talk about those, and there's not too much to talk about these. We already kind of mentioned most of the different types. Most of these were just kind of thrown together pretty quickly to kind of get an idea out, and I figured out, hey, that doesn't really look good for most of them, and so I kind of changed things over time. As you see in the rural area, a lot of the trees changed over time because I just did them slightly differently whenever I figured something could be improved upon. So back here on the server in survival mode, you can kind of see that there's hopefully a reason why things change over time, that they're getting better, at least somewhat. But if we look at this final design for the big tree in the rural area, you can see that there's kind of a couple decisions that I made here that I changed my mind on in between the creative mode versions and this one. The texturing isn't done quite as well on these, or on this one specifically, because it's harder to do shading on survival mode, like just getting up there, like stepping back, getting back up there and stepping back and like looking and everything like that. It's a lot easier to do when you can fly. But there's also other aspects that just kind of changed once it's tied to the terrain. You have to like add a little bit of dirt and stuff. Here in survival mode, we also had to, mob proof. So there's a lichen on some of the branches and stuff like that, which I think just, has a little bit of peace of mind, so you don't have to worry about mobs and stuff. The top of it is a little bit flatter. It's a little bit flatter than most of the trees in the test. That's not really intentional either. That just kind of ended up being a consequence of how I did the branches, which wasn't really planned out. I just kind of did a little bit of freehand tree stuff, and it kind of ended up making a pretty nice tree. But I guess that brings us on to the farmhouse. The farmhouse was it was inspired by something in real life, I guess is what I'll say about it. I wasn't able to build the building exactly how I wanted it to be because it just didn't really work out in Minecraft very well. It had a very funny shape. It was kind of like spread out in certain places really strangely. I don't really know why, but it ended up being for the benefit, I think, because this is a really nice build. I like it quite a bit. You can see it quite well from a distance, actually, like even across the river and in different places, because it kind of sticks out just a little bit above the trees, so you can kind of see it just peeking out above the top of things a little bit, which I think is pretty nice because it's kind of a feature piece of the rural area. The tree and this farmhouse are kind of what tie it all together, I think. Now, it does have a complete interior as well as most of my builds do. You have a dining table and couch and different things in here, and a little kitchen area. You have an upstairs with some bedrooms and stuff. nothing really to talk about there other than just like interior design, which I spent a while trying to like think of something to do here, and I ended up just kind of keeping everything pretty simple. We have a little greenhouse, which I like quite a bit. It's a little bit weird. You got some weird Minecraft things going on with like glass and stuff. Even like right here, you can kind of just walk through it, or different things like that, which kind of just don't look right. But it was the best I could do. This was one of the last details we added. Little Rufus here. Um, he's Rufus. He's a dog. I just named him that. I like that name. Anyway, we got nothing really else in the rural area, I think, to talk about other than maybe some of the finer details. So in a lot of these wooded areas, or just like open areas as well, more landscape things, I decided to kind of intentionally place my flowers and grass in specific ways, so the grass is in specific spots that I don't think could be mowed as much. So like you got tall grass up in the corners behind trees and stuff. You got it in areas that I don't think would be mowed as much. Like I don't think the beekeeper would really mow this area because he wants more flowers for his bees. You also have flowers in specific places as well. You have roses and these like bushes and stuff like that only around the beekeeper's area. You don't really have them on the other side of the island or anything like that. You have yellow flowers and blue flowers in the sunnier bits. You have white flowers in the shadier bits. You have those nether roots. Is that what they're called? What are these called? Crimson roots over here in the kind of open areas. That's intentional. I think they look a little bit like a certain type of flower that we have near where I live. Um, I don't know what they're called exactly, but they're modeled after something in real life, and I think they kind of look the part. I really like them in these kind of more open areas. You even have them next to the farmhouse a little bit. But that was kind of the thought process behind placing a lot of the flowers that I place. There could be a couple areas that have changed over time as well because of Enderman. Um, Enderman would come along and pick up grass blocks, especially before it mob-proofed the whole island. They still do it occasionally because they'll teleport in from areas that aren't mob-proofed. But there's not much I can do about that on the server right now because we have mob griefing on for specific reasons, and we can't use data packs again for specific reasons, so we can't have Enderman griefing specifically. It just is mob griefing is on or off, and we want it on the server right now. But we're pretty much at the end of this season anyway, so next season, because of different technical things we'll be doing, we'll probably have anti-Enderman grief on as a data pack or something like that, which will be very nice. I'll like that quite a bit. But I guess that's pretty much all there is to talk about in the rural area. Yeah. Well, I guess that's kind of the end of the world tour. We talked about everything. This really was one of my favorite projects that I've done so far, which isn't why I finished it, but it was just it's something I really enjoyed. I think it turned out really well too. The server is probably wrapping up pretty soon. I don't think anybody's really going to be on here much after this, but maybe a couple people here and there doing audit and things. Really nothing to talk about. But we should be starting the next season pretty soon. Maybe as soon as next week. As far as upload schedules go, I could just continue my normal weekly uploads. It might happen. I don't know for sure. But I'm pretty excited to get started on something else. I think I have a pretty good idea in mind as well as to what I might want to be doing next season. I won't talk about it too much because I could end up doing something completely different. Who knows? But as far as this build goes, we're pretty much done here. I think I really enjoyed it. But there's nothing really I want to change or add. There's a few things that I think in the future really far future, I would like to change. Like I would like to maybe add a little bit more shading to the leaves in the rural area, or maybe do a little bit more detail in certain places. Maybe make the town a little bigger. Um, I don't know, but really, how it is right now, I really like. I think for doing this project at this certain time in my life and everything like that, this is perfect. Really, I really like it. But we're done. Yeah, we're done with the season, done with the world tour, done with everything. I guess. I guess I'll see you guys in the next season or something like that. Thank you guys all for watching, and God bless.